Welcome. This is Mr. Perry, and our presentation for today, put together by Miss Von Triska, very good presentation, is called The Five Kingdoms. And she would like you to take some notes. So if you don't have a paper and a pen, take a minute now, go get a piece of paper, and a pen, and let's take some good notes. So the presentation, once again, is called The Five Kingdoms, and she wants you to enter into the worlds of biodiversity. Stop the presses! Before we learn about grouping living things, we have a problem. Viruses do not fit neatly into any kingdom because, on their own, they can do nothing until they enter a living cell, called a host. Without cells of living organisms, viruses would not be able to multiply. Therefore, viruses are not living things. So what's a virus? Virus is a submicroscopic DNA surrounded by a protein coat that cannot reproduce or copy itself without a host's cell. The five-kingdom taxonomy, but not viruses. Can viruses die? Not really, because they're not completely alive. They have no organelles. They only have an outer protein shell and a strand of DNA. Certain types of light, though, can damage the virus's outer shell and deactivate them. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, protists can be pathogens. Pathogen, an organism that transmits, causes disease. Viruses come in several shapes. The picture here shows some of the shapes. Viruses. How do they get their host shell? Well, some float in the air, some get coughed out of one organism and land on another. Some are carried in water, soil, or blood, and some sit on surfaces, waiting to be touched and picked up, etc. Some virus pathogens use a vector to get to their host organism cell. What is a vector? It's an organism that carries a disease-causing organism to its host. Example, mosquitoes and ticks are vectors because they carry viruses that may be in the blood they suck, and they carry it to another organism when they bite. Zoonotic, diseases transferred from animal to human. Five-kingdom taxonomy, but not viruses. How are more viruses multiply? How do viruses multiply? Well, viruses attach to the outside of a cell and inject their own DNA into the host's cells. The host cell is tricked into making copies of the virus instead of the cell's own copies. Finally, the virus fills the cell until the cell bursts, releasing more viruses to attack more cells. Finally, taxonomic classification of living things. How do we organize, group, or classify all the living things in the world? Well, Carl Linnaeus in the 1700s in Sweden, he was the first person to develop a way of grouping living organisms from biggest to smallest groupings. His work was called Systema Naturae. Taxonomy, the science of grouping living organisms. Linnaeus only used 3 major kingdoms. Linnaeus gave organisms a 2-part Latin naming system to identify smallest, similar groupings from each other, like a last name and first name. Taxonomy classification is based on biggest to smallest similar groupings. Kingdom, 5 major groups: phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, which is the smallest grouping. Taxonomy of living organisms. Oh, well, we have a way to remember the taxonomy classification order, and we use kingdom, Philip, came over for good spaghetti. King Philip came over for good spaghetti, which stands for kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Kingdom, Animalia, phylum, Chordata, class, Mammalia, order, Carnivora, family, Candide, genus, Canis, and the species is Familiaris. Taxonomy's largest group, the kingdoms. The kingdom is the largest grouping of living organisms. We will be using the 5-kingdom system: Monera, prokaryotic primitive cells, bacteria, and blue-green algae; Protista, eukaryotic, protozoa, mold, slime, molds, and algae; fungi, mold, yeast, mildew, smuts, toadstools, and mushrooms; plants, algae, mosses, ferns, flowering plants, and non-flowering plants; animals, sponges, insects, worms, fish, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals. Kingdom Monera. Kingdom Monera, bacteria, archaea, and blue-green algae. This kingdom is only made of prokaryotic organisms, meaning their cells have no nucleus and do not have membrane-bound organelles. Examples of this kingdom are found everywhere and in every environment on Earth. Some scientists put archaea into its own 6th kingdom. Archaea are found where hot lava enters water and in the extreme cold Arctic. Bacteria, the bad. This is part of the kingdom Monera about bacteria, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Bacteria, the bad. Bacteria have caused 40% of all food-borne illnesses, poisoning. E. coli, typically found in intestines where they are helpful in breaking down or digesting food, but they can escape through feces or poop and can contaminate water, soil, meat, etc. Listeria, bacteria that can contaminate cantaloupe, hot dogs, and deli meats. Salmonella can contaminate peanut products, turkey, eggs, and peppers. Staphylococcus can contaminate meat. You can prevent illness by washing hands, washing fruits and veggies, cooking meat thoroughly, drinking pasteurized milk, and fruit drinks. Bacteria, the bad. Bacteria can cause illness and death if they enter the bloodstream or tissues and release deadly toxins, cause a bacterial infection by feeding off of dead cells, can overwhelm an organism's immune system when bacteria reproduce quickly and reach large numbers. As you can see here, we have salmonella, yeast, and a yeast infection. Bacteria, the bad. Historical worst bacterial outbreaks. Well, we had the Black Death Plague. It was bacteria that was carried by fleas that infect small animals like rats that bite humans. More than half the human population in Europe died. Tuberculosis, or TB, is bacteria. It was transmitted in air and attacked the lungs, killed 1 in 7 people. Currently, the bacteria is becoming resistant to antibiotics, and outbreaks could become worse in years to come. Typhus. This bacteria has killed millions. It is transmitted by lice. Cholera is carried by contaminated water and food and causes extreme diarrhea and vomiting. Affected people from India, New York, New Orleans, and settlers on the Oregon Trail. Here we see bacteria gone ugly. We see the Black Plague, cholera, and tuberculosis in a cow lung. Bacteria, the good. Beneficial bacteria that is helpful. Lactobacillus, a bacteria that aids in breaking down food in the intestines and also helps to ferment foods and drinks. Then we have Bacteroides theta iotomicron, bacteria in our intestines that break down plant material. Otherwise, we would not be able to eat plants. Friendly bacteria, probiotics. These bacteria can help digestion, build a stronger response to allergies, and prevent and treat diarrhea. Germs. So what are germs? Microscopic bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa that can cause disease. Pathogen, a bacteria, protist, or virus that causes a disease. Vaccine, medicine made from parts of dead or living disease-causing organisms that is used to help create antibodies in another organism's body in order to protect against those diseases. Antibodies are proteins on blood cells that recognize and attack certain diseases. Immune, the ability to resist disease. Pathogens. Sometimes diseases can get out of control and cause more cases of illness than expected. This is called an outbreak or epidemic. Quarantine. Separating and observing an organism that may have a contagious disease. Antibiotic, or against living, a medicine that stops or kills the growth of microorganisms. And pandemic, a disease that spreads all over the world. Cancer. Cancer is an uncontrollable growth of abnormal cells that interfere with the health of an organism, often caused by a gene mutation. Some forms are inherited. Some forms are caused by a virus that inserts its DNA into a cell, forcing that cell to make virus DNA, and these cells grow rapidly, forming tumors and interfering with how organs should function normally. Kingdom Protista. Protists. Unicellular eukaryotic organisms that include the protozoans, most algae, and often some fungi, such as slime molds. Plant-like protists, such as algae, get their energy from sunlight through photosynthesis. Fungus-like protists, such as slime molds, decompose decaying material. Organisms that break down and feed dead things are decomposers. Slime mold. Theory before microscopes about where and how living things arise, spontaneous generation, and the invention of pasteurization. Kingdom fungi, eukaryotic and multicellular organisms that feed off of dead or decaying matter. They have a thin root-like filament called a hyphae. Characteristics of fungi, made of tubular filaments called hyphae. The filament, a thin thread-like structure. Walls of hyphae contain a fibrous substance called chitin. Fungi are heterotrophic, must feed on other organisms as food. Fungi are decomposers, feed on and break down dead and decaying organisms. Fungi spread by dispersing spores, tiny asexual seed-like units that can become new fungi. When fungi invade. Mushroom life cycle and fairy rings. Some species of mushrooms drop their spores and create hyphae that intertwine with other mushrooms' hyphae underground. Above ground, this looks like a circle or fairy ring of mushrooms. Fairy, elf, and pixie rings, the myths of mushrooms. A fairy ring, also known as fairy circle, elf or pixie ring, is a naturally occurring ring or arc of mushrooms. Folk legends say the toadstool or mushroom rings were caused by elves or fairies dancing all night, wearing out the grass in a circle. Some legends say that fairies, elves, or pixies sit on the tops of the mushrooms or pick the mushrooms to use as umbrellas. Other legends say dragons burned rings into the ground so only mushrooms can grow there for 7 years. Most legends agree that the devil or harm-causing beings are in the middle of the ring, so you should not step into the ring. And there they are, fairy rings. Kingdom plants. Some plant characteristics: they cannot move on their own. Most can reproduce asexually and sexually. Eukaryotic, or modern cells with a nucleus, have specialized structures called chloroplasts that contain a green substance called chlorophyll, which allows the plant to make its own food. Green plants are autotrophs and can produce their own food through a process called photosynthesis. Without plants, there would be no oxygen and no food on Earth. Autotrophy, meaning self-feeder, able to make their own food. Photosynthesis, process of plants making food, glucose and sugar, using carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. This process takes place in the plant's chloroplast, an organelle in the plant cell that contains a green substance called chlorophyll. Photosynthesis. Plants make glucose from carbon dioxide and water. Glucose is sugar, which is a simple carbohydrate. When animals people breathe out, they release carbon dioxide and water into the atmosphere. That's called respiration. When you breathe in, you take in oxygen released by plants. Respiration is the photosynthesis equation in reverse. Plants can talk to each other by working together with fungi. Kingdom plants. Plants are divided into smaller groups based on whether or not the plant's body has specialized structures, whether the plant has a way of transporting substances like food and water, whether the plant creates flowers and seeds, and if so, whether or not the seeds are contained inside a fruit. Plant kingdom, plant reproduction. Most plants can reproduce asexually, vegetative propagation, and sexually. Some plants have both male and female parts. Other plants either have male or female parts. The plant's sperm pollen must get to the female ovary to create a seed-fertilized egg. Pollen can be carried to the ovule by the wind, insects like bees, moths, butterflies, birds and mammals like bats, and people. Once the pollen travels into the ovule, a seed is formed. Often the seed is contained inside a fruit or vegetable. Seeds can make new plants. The animal kingdom. Some animal characteristics: they are multicellular, heterotrophic, different feeders, cannot make their own food, able to move sometimes in their lives, respond quickly to their environment through use of muscle and nerve cells, mostly reproduce sexually, and do not have cell walls. Some of the more familiar groups of the animal kingdom is in the group class. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus. The 5 most well-known classes of vertebrates, animals with backbones, are mammals, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians. They are all part of the phylum Chordata, having a spinal cord. There are also a lot of animals without backbones. These are called invertebrates and are part of the phylum Arthropoda arthropoid. 2 of the most commonly known classes in this phylum are arachnoids, and insects. Class mammals, characteristic of mammals. They have fur, drink milk from mammary glands sometime in their lives, maintain a constant body temperature, and that's called mammary glands, okay? This class includes humans and many other animals like duck-billed platypus, dolphins, whales, dogs, bats, gorillas, cats, and many more. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have gone through the 5 kingdoms, and I hope you took good notes. There's a lot of information here and some pretty tough things to pronounce as well. So hope you get through it and take, as I said, your time, get this stuff down, and get it in. Hit it and quit it. Let's get it done.